The ping of a new ride request jolted me from my half-asleep daze. I blinked, focusing on the glowing screen of my phone mounted on the dashboard. 2:17 a.m. I'd been dozing in my car outside a 24-hour diner, waiting for that one last fare to make my nightly quota. Now here it was, a pickup from the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the edge of town. I yawned and started the engine, the old Camry sputtering to life. The streets were empty as I cruised through the sleeping city, streetlights casting an eerie orange glow on the wet pavement. A light drizzle had started, tiny droplets speckling my windshield. The Rusty Nail came into view, its neon sign flickering weakly in the misty air. A lone figure stood under the awning, hunched against the chill. As I pulled up, the person, a man I could now see, straightened up and walked towards my car with an unsteady gait. I rolled down the passenger window. "Uber for Mark?" The man nodded, his face hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He opened the back door and slid in, the car dipping slightly under his weight. "How's it going tonight?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. The man didn't respond, just grunted and looked out the window. Great, I thought. A chatty one. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. I was about to try again with some small talk when the man suddenly spoke. "Change of plans," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I need you to take me somewhere else." I frowned. "Okay, sure. Where to?" "Just drive north on Highway 9. I'll tell you when to turn off." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Highway 9 led out of the city, winding through dense forest before reaching the next town over, about an hour away. It wasn't an unusual request. I'd had plenty of long-distance fares before, but something about this guy's tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I merged onto the highway, the roads now completely deserted. My passenger sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Every few seconds he'd crane his neck to look out the back window. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He grunted again. "Fine. Just keep driving." The minutes ticked by, the glow of the city fading behind us as we drove deeper into the night. The forest pressed in on both sides of the road, a dark wall of trees. My passenger hadn't said a word since we got on the highway, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. I glanced at my phone. We'd been driving for almost 30 minutes, and the fare was already higher than most of my nightly earnings combined. But the money didn't matter anymore. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around, to get as far away from this guy as possible. Just as I was about to suggest we head back, the man spoke again. "Pull over here. I have something to show you." My blood ran cold. We were in the middle of nowhere, not a single light visible except for my headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. I don't think that's a good idea," I stammered. "I'm not really supposed to stop unless it's the destination. Pull over." His voice was steel, brooking no argument. My mind raced. If I refused, what would he do? I had no idea if he was armed, but if I pulled over, I'd be at his mercy, miles from help. In that moment of indecision, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. The man was reaching into his jacket, his hand disappearing inside. Time seemed to slow down. I saw two options laid out before me with crystal clarity. Stop the car and face whatever this man had planned, or take my chances on the road. I chose the road. My foot slammed on the accelerator, the engine roaring as we shot forward. The man cursed, thrown back against his seat. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Stop the car!" I ignored him, pushing the old Camry to its limits. The speedometer crept past 90, then 100. The road ahead was a blur, the lines melting together in the rain. A hand grabbed my shoulder, fingers digging in painfully. I said stop. I jerked the wheel, the car swerving violently. The man lost his grip, tumbling across the back seat. In the rearview mirror, I saw something fall from his jacket, the metallic glint of a gun. My heart pounding in my ears, I looked frantically for somewhere to turn off. Up ahead, I spotted a break in the trees, a narrow dirt road barely visible in the darkness. I wrenched the wheel, tires screeching as we left the highway. The car bounced and shuddered on the uneven ground, branches scraping against the windows. Behind me, I heard scrabbling as the man tried to right himself and reach for his weapon. The dirt road curved sharply. I took the turn too fast, feeling the car start to slide. I fought the wheel, but it was useless. We spun, the world outside the windows becoming a dizzying blur of shadows and rain. There was a tremendous crash, the sound of breaking glass and crunching metal. Then silence. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the rain on my face. I was lying on my back, staring up at the canopy of trees above. Slowly, painfully, I sat up. The car was a wreck, wrapped around a massive oak tree a few feet away. The driver's side door hung open, and I realized I must have been thrown clear in the crash. By some miracle, I seemed to be mostly unharmed, bruised and battered, but nothing felt broken. Then I remembered my passenger. Heart racing, I scrambled to my feet, looking around wildly. There was no sign of him. The back door of the car was open, but the man wasn't inside. Had he been thrown too? Or had he managed to get out and run? I limped around the car, scanning the surrounding forest. It was still dark, but a faint glow on the horizon suggested dawn wasn't far off. I couldn't see any signs of which way he might have gone. My phone. I needed to call for help. I patted my pockets, but they were empty. It must still be in the car. I leaned into the wreckage, careful of the broken glass. The phone was there, still attached to its mount on the dashboard. Miraculously, it seemed undamaged. I grabbed it, my fingers shaking as I tried to unlock the screen. No signal. Of course, we were in the middle of nowhere. I looked back at the road we'd come down. It wasn't much of a road at all, really, more of a trail, overgrown and rarely used. I had no idea how far we were from the highway or in which direction it lay. I was considering my options when a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. There, at the edge of the small clearing created by our crash, stood my passenger. He looked like hell. His clothes were torn and dirty, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. But what terrified me most was the gun in his hand, pointed straight at my chest. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice eerily calm. Things could have been so much simpler. I raised my hand slowly, the phone still clutched in one of them. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Just take the car, okay? Take whatever you want. I won't say anything." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "It's a little late for that, don't you think? No, I'm afraid we're well past the point of no return." He took a step forward, and I instinctively backed up, my back pressing against the crumpled metal of the car. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "I have a family, a little girl. She's only 4. Something flickered in the man's eyes, a moment of hesitation, maybe even a touch of remorse. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, determined look. "I'm sorry," he said, and I believed he meant it. "But I can't leave any witnesses." Time seemed to slow down again as I watched his finger tighten on the trigger. In that eternal moment, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Regrets for things left undone. Memories of my daughter's laugh, my wife's smile. The absurd realization that I'd never know how my fare would have rated this ride. The gunshot was deafening in the quiet forest. I flinched, waiting for the pain, but it never came. I opened my eyes, not realizing I'd squeezed them shut. The man was still standing there, a look of confusion on his face. Then he crumpled to the ground. Behind where he'd been standing was another figure holding a smoking gun. "Police, drop your weapon." I sagged against the car, my legs suddenly unable to support me. As the figure approached, I saw it was a state trooper, her face a mask of professional concern. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, kicking the gun away from my passenger's limp form. I nodded mutely, still trying to process what had just happened. "We got a report of a car driving erratically on Highway 9, she explained, checking the man's pulse. "I was patrolling nearby and saw your tire tracks leaving the road. Followed them down here." She looked up at me. "Looks like I got here just in time." As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I slid down to the ground, my back against the ruined car, and began to sob. The trooper knelt beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now, it's over." But as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, illuminating the wreckage of my car and the body of the man who'd nearly killed me, I knew it was far from over. This night would stay with me forever, a stark reminder of how quickly an ordinary drive could turn into a nightmare. I'd survived, yes, but a part of me would always be on that dark road, heart pounding, waiting for a passenger to say those chilling words. "Pull over here. I have something to show you." Story 2. The blue and red lights flashed in my rearview mirror, piercing the darkness of the empty highway. My heart raced as I eased onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. I'd been driving for hours, and fatigue had clearly gotten the better of me. But as I watched the unmarked police car pull up behind me, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves as I lowered my window. The cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine from the dense forest lining both sides of the road. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen another car, let alone a police officer. What were the chances of getting pulled over out here? The car door opened and I squinted against the glare of the headlights. A tall figure emerged, walking towards me with a measured pace. As he approached, I could make out the outline of a police uniform, but something about it seemed different. The cut wasn't quite right, and the badge on his chest didn't catch the light the way it should have. "License and registration, please," he said, his voice gruff and impatient. I nodded, fumbling in my purse for my wallet. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why I felt so uneasy. "Of course, officer," I replied, handing over the documents. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" "I don't think I was speeding." He didn't answer immediately, instead studying my license with an intensity that made me squirm. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his face half hidden in shadow. "You were weaving a bit back there," he said. "Long drive." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Yes, I've been on the road for about 6 hours now. I guess I'm more tired than I realized." "Where you headed?" he asked, still holding my license. "Just passing through," I said, gesturing vaguely ahead. "Visiting family a few states over." He nodded slowly, then leaned in closer. His breath smelled of cigarettes and something metallic. "Mind if I take a look in your trunk?" My unease returned full force. "Is that really necessary, officer? I haven't done anything wrong." His expression hardened. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. That's when I noticed it. The badge number on his uniform didn't match the one on his car. My heart began to pound so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Is everything all right, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd really like to get back on the road if possible. He didn't respond, instead reaching for the door handle himself. I quickly hit the lock button, and his eyes narrowed. "I said step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his tone now unmistakably threatening. I fumbled for my phone, only to realize with horror that I had no signal. The officer began pounding on my window, shouting for me to unlock the door. In a panic, I turned the key in the ignition, praying my old car would start on the first try. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas pedal. Tires squealing, I peeled back onto the highway, leaving the man in my dust. In my rearview mirror, I saw him sprint back to his car. Within seconds, the fake police lights were flashing again, growing larger as he gained on me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The speedometer crept higher and higher as I pushed my car to its limits. Trees whizzed by in a dark blur, and I struggled to keep the car steady on the winding road. The pursuer was closing in, his bumper now just feet from mine. I searched desperately for any sign of civilization, a turnoff, anything that might offer an escape. But there was nothing but endless forest and empty road. Suddenly his car rammed into my back bumper. The impact sent me fishtailing, and I fought to regain control. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the gravity of my situation. This man, whoever he was, clearly had no intention of letting me go. As if in answer to my silent prayers, I spotted a sign for an upcoming rest area. It was a long shot, but it was my only hope. I took the exit at the last possible second, tires screeching as I barely made the turn. The fake cop wasn't prepared for my sudden maneuver and overshot the exit. The rest area parking lot was empty, save for a single semi-truck. I pulled up alongside it, killing my lights and engine. My whole body was shaking as I slouched down in my seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. I heard the roar of an engine as the pursuer's car returned, slowly circling the parking lot. I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the sound faded into the distance. I waited another 10 minutes before I allowed myself to breathe normally again. Cautiously, I sat up and peered out the window. The lot was still empty, no sign of the menacing vehicle, but I knew I couldn't stay here. It wasn't safe. With trembling hands, I started the car and pulled out of the rest area, keeping my lights off until I was back on the main highway. I drove through the night, jumping at every set of headlights I saw in my rearview mirror. It wasn't until the first rays of dawn began to color the sky that I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. I pulled into the first town I came across, a small place with a single main street lined with mom-and-pop shops just beginning to open for the day. I parked in front of a diner and stumbled inside, the bell above the door announcing my arrival. The waitress behind the counter took one look at me and her eyes widened. "Honey, are you all right?" she asked, rushing over to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, I burst into tears, the full weight of what had just happened finally hitting me. The waitress guided me to a booth and sat me down, calling out to the cook to phone the sheriff. As I sipped the coffee she brought me, my hands still shaking, I recounted my harrowing night to the kind-faced waitress. She listened with growing horror, squeezing my hand supportively. "You're safe now, dear," she assured me. "Our sheriff will be here any minute. We'll get this sorted out." True to her word, it wasn't long before a police cruiser pulled up outside. The sheriff who walked in was older, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years of service. His uniform was crisp and official, his badge gleaming in the early morning light. He introduced himself and listened patiently as I told my story again, this time managing to keep my composure. When I finished, he nodded gravely. "You did the right thing, ma'am," he said. "We've had reports of a similar incident a few counties over. Seems we might have a police impersonator on our hands." He took down all the details I could remember, the make and model of the car, the fake badge number, a description of the man. As he was about to leave, he paused and turned back to me. "One more thing," he said, his expression serious. "Can you recall the badge number on his car?" I closed my eyes, trying to picture it. "I think it was 5,591. The sheriff's face paled. "That's impossible," he muttered. "What is it?" I asked, a fresh wave of fear washing over me. He hesitated before answering. "That number belonged to a patrol car that went missing 2 years ago, along with the officer driving it." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. The waitress gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "But that would mean—" I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The sheriff nodded grimly. "It means we're dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple impersonator. I'm going to put out an APB right away and get in touch with the state police. In the meantime, I'd like you to come down to the station. We'll need to go over everything again in detail." As I followed the sheriff out to his car, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ordeal was far from over. The mystery of the missing officer and the patrol car loomed large, along with the terrifying question of who or what had really pulled me over on that dark, lonely stretch of highway. One thing was certain: I would never look at a police car the same way again. As we drove to the station, I found myself checking the badge numbers of every patrol car we passed, a new paranoia taking root. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now felt like a dangerous labyrinth where untold horrors could be lurking around any bend. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the small town in warm light. But for me, the shadows of the night still lingered, along with the chilling certainty that somewhere out there a predator in a stolen police uniform was still prowling the highways, waiting for his next victim. Story 3. The streetlight flickered as I pedaled past, casting eerie shadows that danced across the pavement. My phone buzzed, another delivery request. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the accept button. It was almost midnight, and this address was on the outskirts of town. Something in my gut said to call it a night, but the promise of a hefty tip won out. Little did I know that decision would plunge me into a nightmare I'd never forget. I'm Sarah, 23, working as a food delivery cyclist to make ends meet while finishing my degree. It's usually an easy gig: stay fit, set my own hours, and earn some cash. But that night was different. The app chirped, guiding me through winding suburban streets that grew darker and more deserted with each turn. Houses became sparse, replaced by overgrown lots and abandoned buildings. The only sounds were my tires on asphalt and my own quickening breath. Finally, I arrived at the address, a dilapidated Victorian set back from the road and shrouded in shadows. Paint peeled from weathered siding and several windows were boarded up. A lone light glowed from an upstairs room. I dismounted, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I approached the porch, insulated bag in hand. The steps creaked ominously. Before I could knock, the door swung open. A man stood there, backlit by a dim hallway. He was tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to bore right through me. His threadbare robe hung loosely on his frame. "Ah, my dinner arrives," he said, voice raspy. A smile crept across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come in, I'll get your payment." I hesitated. "Sir, I can just hand you the food." "Nonsense," he interrupted, waving me inside. "It's chilly out, I insist." Every instinct screamed to leave, but I found myself stepping over the threshold. The interior was a mess. Stained wallpaper peeling, furniture draped in sheets, a musty smell permeating everything. He shuffled ahead of me into what I assumed was once a living room. "Set it on the table there," he instructed, gesturing vaguely. I complied, eager to complete the transaction and leave. As I placed the bag down, something caught my eye. A framed photo, dusty but intact, showed a smiling family. Mother, father, 2 children. The man in the picture was younger, healthier, but unmistakably my customer. "Beautiful family," I commented, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. His expression darkened. "They're gone now," he said flatly. "Tragic accident. Years ago." "I'm so sorry," I murmured, immediately regretting bringing it up. He stared at me for a long moment, then abruptly turned. "I'll fetch your payment. Don't move." As his footsteps receded upstairs, I let out a shaky breath. The house felt oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in. I glanced around, noting odd details, scratch marks on the doorframe, a faint metallic smell underlying the mustiness. A muffled sound made me freeze. It came again, a thump, followed by what sounded like a whimper. It was coming from somewhere below me. My heart raced. I told myself it was just an old house settling, or maybe a stray animal in the basement. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something was very, very wrong here. I edged toward the hallway, straining to listen. There it was again. Definitely a human sound. Someone was down there, and they were in distress. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot, and I winced. Upstairs, the footsteps paused. I held my breath, willing them to resume. After an agonizing moment, they did. I had to get out of there. I turned to flee, only to find my path blocked. The man stood in the doorway, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, voice dangerously soft. "But we haven't even had dinner yet." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I have other deliveries waiting. If I could just get the payment." He took a step forward. "Oh, I don't think you'll be making any more deliveries tonight." Panic surged through me. I backed away, looking for an escape route. "Please, I need to go. My company tracks all our deliveries. They'll know I'm here." He chuckled, a chilling sound. "No one knows you're here, Sarah. Your precious app has been feeding you false information all night. This address? It doesn't exist." My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? I hadn't told him. And what did he mean about the app? He must have read the confusion on my face. "Technology is a wonderful thing," he mused. "So easy to manipulate if you know how. It was child's play to hack your little delivery system, create a fake order, lure you out here." My mind raced. If he was telling the truth, no one knew where I was. No help was coming. I was on my own. I bolted for the door, but he was faster. His hand clamped around my arm, grip like iron. I screamed, thrashing wildly, but he easily overpowered me. Now, he said, voice mockingly soothing. "There's no need for that. You'll wake our other guests." Other guests? The sound from the basement flashed through my mind. Oh God, there were others down there. I fought with renewed desperation, kicking and clawing. My nails raked across his face, drawing blood. He snarled, momentarily loosening his grip. It was all the opening I needed. I wrenched free and ran, heart pounding. Behind me, I heard him cursing, his footsteps pounding after me. I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock. It finally gave way, and I burst out into the cool night air. My bike. Where was my bike? Panic clouded my thoughts as I scanned the overgrown yard. There, propped against a gnarled old tree. I sprinted towards it. Something whistled past my ear, followed by the dull thunk of impact. A kitchen knife quivered, embedded in the tree trunk mere inches from my head. I didn't look back, just grabbed my bike and pedaled for my life. The gravel road made for treacherous riding in the dark. Branches whipped at my face as I swerved to avoid potholes. I could hear him behind me, the roar of an engine growing louder. He must have had a vehicle stashed nearby. I reached the main road and turned sharply, tires skidding. Headlights illuminated me from behind, engine revving. He was closing in fast. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. Tears streamed down my face, partly from the wind, partly from sheer terror. The car was almost upon me. Suddenly, salvation appeared, a gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope. I swerved into the parking lot, screaming for help. The car screeched to a halt at the entrance. The attendant rushed out, eyes wide at my hysteria. Behind me, I heard tires squeal as the vehicle peeled away into the night. It took hours at the police station to sort everything out. They were skeptical at first, but a background check on the app's fake order raised red flags. When they finally raided the house, they found evidence of multiple victims. The man, a John Simmons it turned out, had lost his family in a car accident years ago. He'd suffered a mental breakdown, fixating on recreating his lost family through kidnapping. The sounds I'd heard were his latest victims, imprisoned in a basement dungeon. In the end, my close call led to the rescue of 3 people and the capture of a serial killer. But the experience left deep scars. I still have nightmares about that night, still flinch at unexpected noises. I gave up the delivery job, unable to shake the fear of where the next order might take me. Sometimes I wonder, what if I hadn't accepted that final delivery? What if I'd trusted my instincts and stayed away? But then I think of those people in the basement, and I know I'd make the same choice again. In risking my life, I saved others. And somehow, that makes the nightmares a little more bearable. As for John Simmons, he's spending the rest of his life behind bars. But on dark nights, when the wind howls and shadows seem to move on their own, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, another predator is waiting. Another trap is being set, and someone, somewhere, is about to accept their last delivery. Story 4. The stench hit me first, a putrid wave that made my eyes water and my stomach churn. I'd been a garbage collector for over a decade, but this smell was something else entirely. It clung to the back of my throat, a mix of rot and something metallic that I couldn't quite place. As I approached the source, a large black garbage bag sitting apart from the other trash, a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. I should have left it alone. Should have tossed it in the truck and gone about my day. But curiosity has always been my downfall. My name's Mike, and this is the story of how I almost became part of someone else's garbage. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I'd been on the job since 4 a.m., making my way through the quiet suburbs as the world slowly woke up around me. The rhythmic hum of the garbage truck and the occasional clang of metal were the only sounds breaking the pre-dawn silence. I was about halfway through my route when I turned onto Maple Street. Nice neighborhood, mostly older folks who kept to themselves. As I worked my way down the street, I noticed something odd outside number 37. Among the usual array of trash cans and recycling bins was a single black garbage bag set apart from the rest. Now, this isn't necessarily unusual. People sometimes have extra trash that doesn't fit in their bins. But something about this bag made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way it was positioned or how the porch light cast long shadows across its surface. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I approached cautiously, my heavy work boots crunching on the gravel driveway. That's when the smell hit me, so strong I could almost taste it. I've dealt with some nasty odors in this job, but this was different. It reminded me of the time I found a dead raccoon in someone's trash, but worse, much worse. Against my better judgment, I reached for the bag. As my fingers closed around the plastic, I felt something shift inside. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Slowly, carefully, I opened the bag just a crack. The smell intensified, making me gag. Through the small opening, I caught a glimpse of something pale and stringy. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. Hair. Human hair. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of thing you saw on TV, not in real life. Not in this quiet neighborhood where the biggest excitement was usually someone putting their recycling in the wrong bin. I was about to run back to the truck and call the police when it happened. A hand, pale and dirty, shot out from the bag and latched onto my wrist. I yelled, trying to jerk away, but the grip was surprisingly strong. The bag rustled and shifted as something inside it moved. To my horror, I saw a face emerge, a woman's face, gaunt and bruised, her eyes wide with desperation. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a moment, I stood there frozen, unable to process what was happening. Then my training kicked in. I'd taken first aid courses as part of the job, though I'd never imagined using those skills in a situation like this. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the panic rising in my throat. "I'm going to get you out of there. Can you tell me if you're hurt?" She nodded weakly. "My leg, I think it's broken, and my ribs." I carefully helped her out of the bag, trying not to cause any further injury. As I did, I got a better look at her condition. She was in bad shape, bruised, cut, and alarmingly thin. Her clothes were torn and filthy, and there was dried blood matting her hair. "I'm Mike," I said, easing her into a sitting position on the ground. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, her eyes darting around nervously. He's going to come back. We need to leave." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's coming back, Sarah?" But before she could answer, we heard the sound of a car engine. Headlights swept across us as a vehicle turned onto the street. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. "It's him," she whispered. "Oh God, he's back." I made a split-second decision. There was no time to get Sarah to the garbage truck. She could barely walk, and I didn't want to risk causing her more pain. Instead, I scooped her up as gently as I could and carried her to the side of the house, hiding us behind a large rhododendron bush. The car pulled into the driveway of number 37. From our hiding spot, I could see a man get out, tall, well-built, probably in his 40s. He looked completely ordinary, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But the way Sarah trembled in my arms told me everything I needed to know about him. The man walked to where the garbage bag had been, his movements calm and unhurried. When he saw the empty bag on the ground, he froze. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the street. I held my breath, pressing myself and Sarah further into the shadows of the bush. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he must be able to hear it. The man moved quickly now, searching around the yard and peering into the neighbors' gardens. I could hear him muttering to himself, his voice growing more agitated with each passing moment. Just when I thought we might be in the clear, Sarah coughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a wheeze, but in the quiet pre-dawn air, it might as well have been a foghorn. The man's head whipped around towards our hiding spot. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. Come out, wherever you are," he called in a sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. "I know you're there, Sarah. Why don't you introduce me to your new friend?" I looked down at Sarah, saw the terror in her eyes, and made another split-second decision. I set her down as gently as I could, whispering, "Stay here. I'll distract him. When you get a chance, run to my truck and lock yourself in. The keys are in the ignition." Before she could protest, I stood up and stepped out from behind the bush. The man's eyes locked onto me, his smile widening. "Well, well," he said. "What do we have here, a good Samaritan?" I held up my hands, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job." He chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Your job, huh? Does your job usually involve poking around in other people's garbage?" As he spoke, he was moving closer, his hand reaching behind his back. I had no doubt he was going for a weapon. I backed up slowly, trying to lead him away from where Sarah was hidden. "Sometimes, yeah. You'd be surprised what people throw away. Why don't we talk about this, huh? I'm sure we can work something out." He was only a few feet away now. I could see the glint of metal as he pulled a knife from his waistband. "Oh, I'm sure we can," he said, his voice dripping with menace. What happened next was a blur. He lunged at me with the knife, but years of hauling garbage had made me stronger than I looked. I managed to dodge the first swing, then grabbed his arm as he came in for another attack. We grappled, each trying to gain the upper hand. I could feel the knife edge inches from my face, the man's hot breath on my cheek as he snarled with effort. In the distance, I heard the sound of a car door slamming. Sarah had made it to the truck. Relief flooded through me, giving me a burst of strength. I twisted hard, forcing the man's arm back. The knife clattered to the ground, but he wasn't done. He headbutted me, stars exploding in my vision. I staggered back, tasting blood in my mouth. The man dove for the knife, snatching it up with a triumphant yell. He turned back to me, eyes wild, blade glinting in the early morning light. And then suddenly he wasn't there anymore. There was a dull thud and the man crumpled to the ground. Behind him stood Mrs. Henderson from number 35, holding a cast-iron skillet and looking as surprised as I felt. "I heard the commotion," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Thought I'd better check it out." I stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. It was probably hysteria, but I couldn't help it. Here I was, cut and bruised from fighting a kidnapper, and I'd been saved by a little old lady with a frying pan. The sound of sirens cut through my laughter. Sarah must have called the police from the truck. Within minutes, the quiet street was a chaos of flashing lights and uniformed officers. As I sat on the back of an ambulance, holding an ice pack to my swollen jaw, I watched them lead the man away in handcuffs. Sarah was being tended to by paramedics, her eyes meeting mine across the yard. She mouthed a silent "thank you," and I nodded in return. A detective approached me, notebook in hand. "So," he said, "want to tell me how a routine garbage collection turned into all this?" I sighed, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "Well," I said, "it all started with a smell." As I began to recount the events of the morning, I realized that my life would never be the same. I'd faced evil and survived, helped save a life, and discovered a strength in myself I never knew I had. And to think, it all started with a garbage bag that didn't smell quite right. Story 5. The bike's chain rattled as I pedaled up the steep, winding road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The insulated bag on my back felt heavier with each turn of the wheels. As the trees thinned out, I caught my first glimpse of the house, a looming Victorian silhouette against the darkening sky. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Something about this delivery felt off from the start. I'd been working as a food delivery cyclist for about 6 months now. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me in shape. Most of my deliveries were to apartment buildings or suburban homes with the occasional office thrown in. But this order was different. The address was on the outskirts of town in an area I'd never ventured before. When the order came through on my app, I almost declined it. The distance alone made it barely worth the fare. But it had been a slow night and I needed the money, so I accepted, grabbed the order from the restaurant and set off. Now as I approached the house, I was starting to regret that decision. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in an eerie twilight. The Victorian mansion loomed before me, its windows dark and shuttered. Paint peeled from the wooden siding and the porch sagged ominously. It looked like no one had lived here for years. I dismounted my bike, my legs shaky from the long uphill ride. The gravel driveway crunched under my feet as I walked my bike towards the house. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, making me jump. "Get it together," I muttered to myself. "It's just a house, probably some eccentric rich person who likes their privacy." As I approached the porch, I noticed there was no light on above the door. In fact, there didn't seem to be any lights on in the house at all. I glanced down at my phone, double-checking the address. This was definitely the right place. I leaned my bike against the porch railing and climbed the creaky steps. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I winced at the sound. It felt like I was disturbing something that should have been left alone. Taking a deep breath, I raised my hand to knock on the door. Before my knuckles could make contact, I heard a sound from inside, a soft thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the gathering darkness. "Food delivery." No response. The footsteps had stopped. I waited a moment, then knocked firmly on the door. The sound echoed ominously through what I imagined to be empty rooms beyond. Still nothing. I was about to give up and call the customer when I heard it. A low, pained moan coming from inside the house. It sounded like someone in distress. My heart started racing. What if the customer had fallen or was hurt? I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. "Hello?" I called again, peering into the darkness beyond. "Is everyone okay in there? I have your food order." The entryway was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a dusty foyer with a grand staircase leading up to the second floor. Cobwebs hung from a crystal chandelier overhead. The air smelled musty and stale, like the house hadn't been opened in years. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around and leave. But what if someone really was hurt? I couldn't just abandon them. Swallowing hard, I took a step inside. "I'm coming in," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard a noise. "Is anyone there?" As if in response, I heard another moan, louder this time, coming from somewhere upstairs. It sounded like a man in pain. I should call the police, I thought. This isn't right. But as I reached for my phone, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no signal. The remote location of the house meant I was completely cut off. Steeling myself, I started up the stairs. Each step creaked loudly, announcing my presence to whatever or whoever was waiting above. I swept my phone's flashlight back and forth, illuminating faded wallpaper and dusty picture frames. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched in both directions. Closed doors lined either side. The moaning sound came again from a room at the far end of the hall. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Uruwa? I'm here to help. Where are you?" I made my way down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. As I neared the door at the end, the moaning stopped abruptly. An eerie silence fell over the house. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn and run to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might genuinely need help. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was large, probably once a master bedroom. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. In the center of the room stood a massive four-poster bed, its once luxurious hangings now tattered and moth-eaten. And there, on the bed, was a figure. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was unnaturally still, propped up against the headboard. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized with growing horror that it wasn't a person at all. It was a mannequin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I had to get out of here. As I turned to flee, the bedroom door slammed shut. I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging. Panic surged through me. I ran to the door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Help!" I screamed, pounding on the wood. "Somebody help me!" A low chuckle came from behind me, sending chills down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. The mannequin on the bed was gone. In its place stood a man, tall, gaunt, with wild eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "I'm so glad you could join us for dinner." "Us." The word echoed in my mind as I noticed movement in the shadows of the room. More figures emerged, men and women, all with the same hungry look in their eyes. I pressed my back against the door, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. When I opened them again, the man was standing right in front of me. His breath was hot on my face, reeking of decay. "You really should be more careful," he said, reaching out a bony hand to caress my cheek. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to enter a stranger's home?" I recoiled from his touch, my hand scrambling for the doorknob behind me. By some miracle, it turned. The lock must have been faulty. Without thinking, I yanked the door open and burst into the hallway. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, taking the stairs two at a time. I could hear them right behind me, their footsteps thundering on the old wooden floors. I burst out of the front door and into the cool night air. My bike was still leaning against the porch where I'd left it. In one fluid motion, I leaped onto the seat and started pedaling. The gravel crunched under my tires as I sped down the driveway. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my energy on putting as much distance between myself and that house as possible. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I finally glanced over my shoulder. The house stood dark and silent on the hill, no sign of my pursuers. Had I imagined the whole thing? But as I watched, a light flickered on in one of the upper windows. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the glow. Even from this distance, I could feel its eyes on me. I turned away and pedaled harder, my legs burning with the effort. I didn't stop until I reached the bright lights and safety of the town. As I locked up my bike outside my apartment that night, my hands were still shaking. I knew I should call the police, report what had happened, but who would believe me? I glanced at my phone, still open to the delivery app. The order for the Victorian house had vanished as if it had never existed. From that night on, I always checked addresses carefully before accepting deliveries. And if an order ever came through for that lonely hill on the outskirts of town, I knew exactly what I'd do. Decline. Story 6. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless snow, each pass barely clearing my view before a fresh blanket of white obscured it again. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out the road ahead. Beside me, Sarah fidgeted with the radio, searching for a station that wasn't static. The tinny sound of Christmas carols faded in and out, punctuated by bursts of electric noise. "Any luck with the GPS?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the road. Sarah sighed, tapping furiously at her phone. "Nothing. No signal out here." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white. We'd been driving for hours, making our way through the mountains to Sarah's parents' house for the holidays. It was supposed to be a 6-hour trip. We were going on 10 now, thanks to the unexpected blizzard that had engulfed us shortly after sunset. I'm Jack, 28, an accountant from the city. Sarah and I had been dating for 2 years, and this was to be my first Christmas with her family. Now I was starting to wonder if we'd make it at all. A gust of wind rocked the car, and I felt the tires slip momentarily before regaining traction. My heart pounded. "Maybe we should pull over, wait it out," I suggested. Sarah shook her head. "We can't stop here. We're in the middle of nowhere. We need to find shelter." As if on cue, the engine sputtered. A warning light flashed on the dashboard. "No, no, no," I muttered, pressing the gas pedal. The car lurched forward a few more feet, then died completely. We coasted to a stop on the shoulder, if you could call it that. Beyond the narrow strip of pavement, there was nothing but an endless expanse of white. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. I tried to restart the car, but the engine just clicked weakly. "I don't know," I admitted. I'll check under the hood, but in this weather..." I zipped up my coat and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical force, nearly knocking me off my feet. Snow pelted my face as I made my way to the front of the car, my boots sinking deep into the accumulating drifts. I popped the hood, but it was a useless gesture. I knew next to nothing about cars, and even if I did, there was no way I could fix anything in these conditions. I slammed it shut and hurried back to the relative warmth of the car. "Anything?" Sarah asked hopefully as I slid back into the driver's seat. I shook my head, brushing snow from my hair. "We're stuck. No cell service, no idea where we are, and the car's dead." Sarah's face fell. She opened her mouth to respond when a flash of light caught her eye. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing through the passenger window. I leaned over, peering into the whiteout. For a moment I saw nothing. Then another flash, headlights cutting through the storm. Hope surged through me. "Hello!" I shouted, rolling down the window and waving frantically. "We need help." The vehicle, a large pickup truck I could now see, slowed as it approached. It pulled up alongside us and the passenger window rolled down. A man leaned out, his face half hidden by a thick beard and a woolen hat pulled low. "You folks all right?" he called over the howling wind. "Our car broke down," I explained. "So we're stranded." He nodded. "Can't leave you out here in this. My place is just up the road. You can wait out the storm there." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. We really appreciate it. Follow me," he said, then paused. I'll give you a ride. Hop in the back." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Getting into a stranger's truck in the middle of a blizzard wasn't exactly safe, but what choice did we have? We quickly grabbed our overnight bags and climbed into the truck's back seat. As we pulled away, leaving our car behind, I caught our rescuer's eye in the rearview mirror. "I'm Jack," I said. "This is Sarah. Thanks again for stopping." He grunted in response. "Name's Bill, don't mention it." We drove in silence for several minutes, the truck's powerful engine easily handling the treacherous conditions. I began to relax, the warmth of the heater thawing my frozen extremities. "So, Bill," Sarah ventured, "do you live around here?" "Yep," he replied, not elaborating. "Must be tough in weather like this," I added, trying to keep the conversation going. Bill's eyes flicked to mine in the mirror. "You get used to it. Learn to be prepared." Something in his tone made me uneasy. I glanced at Sarah, seeing my own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. The truck turned off the main road onto a narrow, winding path that climbed steadily upward. Trees loomed on either side, their branches heavy with snow. The farther we went, the more isolated I felt. Finally, we emerged into a clearing. A cabin stood before us, dark and silent. No welcoming lights, no smoke from the chimney. It looked abandoned. Bill killed the engine. "Home sweet home," he announced, his voice oddly flat. As we climbed out of the truck, the full force of the storm hit us again. I helped Sarah through the deep snow towards the cabin's porch, Bill leading the way. He fumbled with a key, then pushed open the heavy wooden door. "After you," he said, gesturing us inside. The interior was pitch black. I heard Bill moving behind us, then the click of a lock engaging. My heart rate spiked. Bill," I called out, "could we get some light in here?" A match flared to life, illuminating Bill's face in eerie, flickering light. He lit an old oil lamp, casting long shadows across the room. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A table, a few chairs, a wood stove in the corner. Dust covered every surface. This place hadn't been lived in for a long time. "Make yourselves at home," Bill said, moving to light the stove. "Storm might last a while." Sarah gripped my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We'd made a terrible mistake. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "maybe we should try to make it to the next town. We don't want to impose—" Bill straightened, fixing us with a hard stare. "Nearest town's 30 miles away. You'd never make it in this weather." "We'll take our chances," Sarah said, edging towards the door. Bill moved faster than I would have thought possible for a man his size. He planted himself between us and the exit. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," he said softly. Panic rose in my throat. "Look, we appreciate your help, but we really need to go." Bill shook his head slowly. "No one's going anywhere tonight. The room seemed to spin. This couldn't be happening. Any moment now, I'd wake up in our broken-down car, and this would all be a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. This was real, and we were trapped." "What do you want from us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Bill's expression softened, almost sad. "Want? I don't want anything. I'm trying to help you." "By holding us prisoner?" I shot back. "You don't understand," Bill said, "and it's not safe out there. Not just because of the storm." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Bill sighed heavily, suddenly looking much older. "There's something in these woods. Something that hunts on nights like this when the snow hides its tracks and masks its approach." I exchanged a disbelieving look with Sarah. Was this guy serious? "I know how it sounds," Bill continued. "I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Lost my wife to it 10 years back. That's why I patrol these roads during storms. Try to save folks like you from stumbling into its hunting grounds." Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but there was a conviction in Bill's voice, a haunted look in his eyes that gave me pause. "So what? We just wait here until the storm passes?" Sarah asked. Bill nodded. "It's the only way to be sure. I've got supplies. We'll be comfortable enough." I wanted to argue, to demand he let us leave. But a sound from outside stopped me cold, a low, rumbling growl barely audible over the howling wind. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "What was that?" I whispered. Bill's face was grim. "That's why we're staying put." The night stretched on endlessly. We huddled around the wood stove, jumping at every creak of the cabin's timbers, every gust of wind that sounded a little too much like something else. Bill told us stories, about the creature, about others he'd saved, about the wife he'd lost. By the time dawn broke, pale light seeping through the frost-covered windows, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Pristine snow blanketed everything, beautiful and serene. It was hard to imagine the terror of the night before. As Bill drove us back to our car, now barely visible beneath a mound of snow, I struggled to make sense of it all. Had there really been something out there in the darkness? Or was Bill just a lonely, damaged man, his mind warped by tragedy and isolation? In the end, I suppose it doesn't matter. We made it through the night, and that's what counts. But sometimes on dark winter nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself thinking about that cabin in the woods, and I wonder what might be lurking just beyond the reach of the light, waiting for unwary travelers to stumble into its domain. Story 7. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, casting an eerie red glow across the empty parking lot. Lou's Diner, it read, the D sputtering in and out of existence like a dying firefly. I'd been on the road for 18 hours straight, and my eyes felt like they were full of sand. But I needed coffee, needed food, needed something to keep me going for the last leg of this godforsaken haul. I had no idea that pushing open that glass door would be the beginning of the longest night of my life. My name's Jack, and I've been driving big rigs across the country for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the lonely highways, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened at Lou's Diner. I pulled my rig into the lot, the brakes hissing as I brought the beast to a stop. The place looked deserted, but the open sign was lit, so I figured they must be serving. As I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the too quiet night, or the way the moonlight cast long shadows across the empty lot. Whatever it was, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Shaking off the feeling, I pushed open the door. A little bell tinkled overhead, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. The diner was like something out of a time capsule red vinyl booths, a chrome-edged counter and a jukebox in the corner that looked like it hadn't been played since the 70s. But it wasn't the decor that made me stop in my tracks. It was the people. There were maybe half a dozen of them scattered around the diner. A couple in a booth, an old man at the counter, a trucker like me nursing a coffee, and a young woman in the corner booth. Normal enough, except for the way they all turned to look at me the moment I walked in. And I mean all of them at the exact same moment, like some creepy coordinated move. For a second, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They just stared. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all went back to what they were doing. The couple resumed their hushed conversation. The old man turned back to his plate. The trucker lifted his mug to his lips. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the door handle, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I caught the eye of the waitress behind the counter. She was a middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair and too much eye makeup. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sit wherever you like, hon," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "I'll be with you in a jiffy." I nodded, still feeling uneasy, and slid into a booth near the door. Old habits die hard, and I like to keep my escape routes clear. As I settled in, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. Despite the handful of people in the diner, there was hardly any sound. No clinking of cutlery, no murmur of conversation, not even the sizzle of a grill from the kitchen. The waitress appeared at my table, notepad in hand. Her name tag read Doris. "What can I get you, sweetie?" she asked, her pen poised above the pad. "Just coffee for now," I said. "And maybe a menu?" She nodded, that same not quite right smile on her face, coming right up. As she walked away, I couldn't help but notice how tense she seemed. Her shoulders were tight and her eyes kept darting towards a door marked "Staff Only" at the back of the diner. The coffee arrived quickly, steaming hot in a chipped white mug. I wrapped my hands around it, grateful for the warmth. The first sip was bitter and strong, just the way I liked it. But as I set the mug down, I noticed something odd. There was a red smear on the rim of the mug, right where my lips had been. For a split second, I thought it was lipstick, but then I realized it was blood. My tongue darted out, tasting copper. I must have bit my lip without noticing. I was about to call Doris over for a clean mug when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from above. Drip, drip, drip. I looked up and my blood ran cold. There on the ceiling directly above me was a dark, spreading stain. As I watched, a drop formed and fell, landing with a soft plop in my coffee mug. My chair screeched against the linoleum as I stood up abruptly. The sound seemed to echo in the eerie silence of the diner. All eyes turned to me again, but this time they didn't look away. "Everything all right, hon?" Doris asked, her voice strained. I pointed at the ceiling, my hand shaking slightly. There's something dripping from up there." Doris's eyes flicked up, then back to me. For a moment I saw raw fear in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that plastic smile. "Oh, that's nothing to worry about," she said, her voice artificially bright. Just a leaky pipe, I'm sure. Why don't you move to another booth? But I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on that stain, watching as it grew larger, darker. The dripping was getting faster now. Drip, drip, drip. And then I smelled it, that unmistakable coppery scent of blood. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. The silence in the diner became, if possible, even more pronounced. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Doris's smile faltered. "Please, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please just sit down. Don't make a fuss." But it was too late for that. I was already moving, pushing past Doris towards that staff-only door. I don't know what I expected to find, but I knew that whatever was going on, the answer was behind that door. I was halfway across the diner when I felt a hand on my arm. It was the trucker, his grip like iron. "You don't want to do that, buddy," he said, his voice low and menacing. I tried to shake him off, but he held firm. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His other hand was beneath the table, and I caught a glimpse of metal. He had a gun. My mind was racing. What the hell had I stumbled into? A robbery? Some kind of hostage situation? But that didn't explain the blood, the weird behavior, the oppressive silence. Just then there was a loud thump from above, like something heavy had fallen. The stain on the ceiling was spreading rapidly now, dark liquid seeping through the tiles, and then, to my horror, a hand burst through the ceiling. It was pale, streaked with blood, fingers grasping at the air. A strangled scream tore from my throat. All hell broke loose. The couple in the booth leapt to their feet, pulling guns from beneath their jackets. The old man at the counter spun around, a wicked-looking knife in his hand. The young woman in the corner booth just sat there, a look of resignation on her face. "You should have just had your coffee and left," Doris said, her cheerful facade completely gone now. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a shotgun. I stood there, frozen in disbelief as the hand continued to claw at the air. There was another thump, and a section of the ceiling caved in. A body fell through, landing with a sickening thud on the table I had just vacated. It was a man, or what was left of one. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his face a mask of terror, and he was still alive. "Help me!" he gasped, reaching out towards me. The trucker who had grabbed me earlier stepped forward, raising his gun. Without hesitation, he fired 2 shots into the man's head. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the diner. I think I must have made a move then, either to run or to help the man, I'm not sure. All I know is that suddenly I was on the ground, my cheek pressed against the cold linoleum. Someone had tackled me from behind. "We can't let you leave now," a voice said in my ear. It was the woman from the corner booth. "You've seen too much." I struggled, but she was surprisingly strong. "What is this?" I managed to gasp out. "What the hell are you people?" There was a pause, and then Doris spoke. Her voice was different now, deeper, almost inhuman. "We are the keepers of the gate," she said. "And you, my unfortunate friend, are about to become part of something much bigger than yourself." As I lay there, pinned to the floor, I saw Boots approach. Doris crouched down beside me, the shotgun held casually in her hands. Her eyes, when I met them, were completely black. "Welcome to Lou's Diner," she said, a terrible smile spreading across her face, "where the special of the day is always you." The last thing I remember is the butt of the shotgun swinging towards my head. Then darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was tied to a chair in what looked like a storage room. The sounds filtering through the door told me that whatever was happening in the diner was far from over. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others here, bound and gagged like me. Their eyes were wide with terror, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this was only the beginning of a very long night. The neon sign of Lou's Diner still flickers in my nightmares. Sometimes I wake up tasting copper, hearing that terrible drip, drip, drip. And I wonder how many other lonely truckers have pulled into that parking lot, lured by the promise of hot coffee and a warm meal, never to be seen again. So if you're ever driving down a dark, lonely highway in the middle of the night and you see a diner with a flickering neon sign, keep driving, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need that coffee, because you never know what's waiting for you behind that glass door. And trust me, you don't want to find out. Story 8. The app pinged, jolting me from my half-doze. Another order. I glanced at my phone, squinting against the harsh glow in the darkness of my parked scooter. 2:47 a.m. Who the hell orders food this late? As I read the delivery address, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm summer night. 1242 Oakwood Lane, the old Hartley place. Everyone in town knew that house, and everyone avoided it. But tonight, it seemed, I didn't have a choice. I'd been doing this midnight motorcycle delivery gig for about 3 months now. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid decent money, especially during the graveyard shift when tips were higher. Most nights were uneventful, just me, my trusty scooter, and the empty streets of our sleepy town. But this was different. The Hartley house had been abandoned for years, ever since the old man died under mysterious circumstances. Rumors swirled about what really happened, each version more gruesome than the last. Kids dared each other to touch the rusty gate, but no one ever ventured inside. And now, somehow, I had a food order to deliver there. I considered canceling, but my rating was already on thin ice after a string of late deliveries last week. One more strike and I'd lose this job. With rent due and my savings account hovering near zero, I couldn't afford that risk. "It's just a house," I muttered to myself, kick-starting my scooter. The engine sputtered to life, breaking the eerie silence of the deserted street. Probably some kids playing a prank. Deliver the food, collect the tip, and get out. Simple. As I weaved through the empty streets, the warm summer air whipped against my face. Normally I loved this feeling of freedom, but tonight it felt ominous, like fingers trying to hold me back. The streets grew narrower as I entered the old part of town, houses looming on either side, their windows dark and lifeless. Oakwood Lane appeared almost out of nowhere, a dirt road branching off from the main street. My headlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a path overgrown with weeds. Ancient oaks lined the route, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. The Hartley house stood at the end of the lane, a decrepit Victorian silhouette against the star-studded sky. As I pulled up to the rusted iron gate, my headlight flickered, then died completely. Great, just great. I dismounted, the gravel crunching under my feet. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint chirping of crickets. I checked my phone again, 3:01 a.m. The order details showed no special instructions, just leave at door. The gate creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the still night air. I winced, feeling like an intruder. The overgrown path to the front door was barely visible in the moonlight. Each step felt heavier than the last as I approached the house. The porch steps groaned under my weight. Cobwebs clung to my jacket as I navigated around a broken rocking chair. The front door loomed before me, its once grand paintwork now peeling and faded. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. This was stupid. No one lived here. It had to be a prank. I should just leave the food and go, but as I set the bag down, I heard it. A faint sound from inside the house, a creak, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. My heart began to race. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain. "Food delivery?" No response, just another creak, closer this time. I fumbled for my phone, intending to call the customer, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. Dead battery, perfect timing. The smart thing would be to leave, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I tried the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a long, drawn-out groan. The smell hit me first, musty and damp, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place, something sickly sweet and rotten. "Hello," I called again, peering into the darkness. "I have your delivery. Is anyone there?" Silence. Then from somewhere deep in the house came a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, pained moan. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but what if someone was hurt? I couldn't just leave them. Cursing my dead phone, I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked with each step. I fumbled along the wall, searching for a light switch. My fingers brushed against something soft and sticky. Cobwebs, I hoped. Finally, I found a switch and flicked it. Nothing happened. Another moan echoed through the house, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from upstairs. "I'm coming!" I shouted, moving towards where I thought the stairs might be. "Are you hurt? Can you hear me?" My foot hit something solid, the bottom step. I began to climb, one hand on the dusty banister, the other outstretched in the darkness. The moaning grew louder, more urgent. At the top of the stairs, I paused, trying to get my bearings. A faint sliver of moonlight filtered through a grimy window, barely illuminating a long hallway lined with closed doors. The moaning had stopped. An eerie silence fell over the house. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking. "Where are you?" A door at the end of the hall slowly creaked open. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. This was how people died, walking into dark rooms in abandoned houses. But I'd come this far, I had to know. I stepped into the room. Moonlight spilled through a large bay window, illuminating what must have once been a grand bedroom. A massive, four-poster bed dominated the space, its sheets gray with dust. And there in the center of the bed was a figure. I squinted, trying to make out details in the dim light. It looked like an old man propped up against the headboard. His head was bowed, chin resting on his chest. "Sir," I said softly, approaching the bed, "are you all right? Did you order food?" No response. As I got closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. The man wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. I reached out a trembling hand and touched his shoulder. The body crumbled under my touch, collapsing into a pile of dust and bones. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. A floorboard creaked behind me. Slowly, I turned around. A figure stood in the doorway, blocking my exit, tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "You're late," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper. "We've been waiting so long." As my eyes adjusted, I saw more shapes emerging from the shadows. Pale, emaciated figures, dozens of them filling the room, all with the same hungry look in their glowing eyes. "The food," I stammered, backing away until I hit the wall. It's downstairs, by the door." The figure in the doorway smiled, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "Oh, we're not interested in that food," it said, taking a step towards me. "You see, we prefer our meals fresh." They advanced as one, bony hands reaching for me. I looked frantically around the room for an escape, any escape. The window. It was my only chance. Without thinking, I sprinted towards it. Hands grasped at my jacket, tearing the fabric. I felt cold fingers brush against my neck as I dove headfirst through the glass. I hit the overgrown lawn hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Shards of glass rained down around me. Ignoring the pain, I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, inhuman shrieks filled the night air. I didn't look back, focusing only on reaching my scooter. I vaulted over the gate and practically threw myself onto the seat. The engine roared to life on the first try. A small miracle. I gunned it down Oakwood Lane, gravel spraying behind me. Only when I reached the main road did I dare to glance back. The Hartley house stood dark and silent on its hill, no sign of the horrors I'd encountered. Had I imagined it all? But as I watched, a light flickered on in the upstairs window. A figure stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Even from this distance, I could feel its hunger. I turned away and twisted the throttle, pushing my scooter to its limits. I didn't slow down until I was safely back in the heart of town, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights. As I parked outside my apartment, my hands were still shaking. I knew I should call the police, report what had happened, but who would believe me? I glanced at my phone, now charged enough to turn on. The delivery app was open, but the order for the Hartley house had vanished as if it had never existed. From that night on, I always checked addresses carefully before accepting deliveries. And if an order ever came through for 1242 Oakwood Lane again, I knew exactly what I'd do. Let someone else take the risk. Some jobs just aren't worth the tip. Story 9. The CB radio crackled to life, cutting through the monotonous hum of my rig's engine. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It had been silent for hours, my only company the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me and the occasional flash of headlights in my rearview mirror. "Hello, can anyone hear me? Please, I need help." The voice was faint, distorted by static, but the panic in it was unmistakable. I grabbed the handset, thumb hovering over the talk button. Something made me hesitate. In 15 years of long-haul trucking, I'd heard my share of distress calls, but this felt different. I'm Mike, 43, career trucker. I've crisscrossed this country more times than I can count, hauling everything from produce to machinery. The open road is my home and other truckers are my family. When one of us is in trouble, we help, no questions asked, so why was I hesitating now? The voice came again, more desperate this time. "Please, is anyone out there? I'm trapped. I don't know where I am." I took a deep breath and keyed the mic. "This is Big Mike, I hear you. What's your situation?" Static hissed for a long moment. I was about to repeat my call when the voice returned, clearer now. "Oh, thank God, I've been in an accident. My truck's off the road. I'm hurt bad." "Okay, stay calm," I said, slipping into rescue mode. "Can you give me your location?" "I'm not sure," the voice replied, fear edging in again. "Last thing I remember, I was on Route 87 headed north. There was a storm. I must have dozed off." I frowned. Route 87 was 2 states over from where I was. How was I picking up this transmission? "That's a long way from here, buddy," I said. "Let me see if I can raise someone closer to help." I switched channels, calling out for any truckers near Route 87. Nothing but static answered me. Weird. There should be plenty of traffic on that stretch. I went back to the original channel. "Hey, you still there? What's your handle?" "Ghost Rider," the voice replied. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. "All right, Ghost Rider," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm having trouble reaching anyone else. Can you give me any landmarks, anything to help pinpoint your location?" "It's so dark," Ghost Rider said, his voice fading. "I see trees, lots of trees, and there's a bridge, I think. Old stone bridge over a ravine." I racked my brain trying to remember that stretch of 87. "Okay, that helps. Hang tight. I'm going to try to get you some help." I spent the next hour alternating between reassuring Ghost Rider and attempting to contact emergency services or other truckers. But every channel was dead and my cell phone showed no signal. It was as if the world beyond my headlights had ceased to exist. Ghost Rider's transmissions grew weaker, more disjointed. He rambled about the cold, about shadows moving in the trees. More than once, the line went silent for so long I thought I'd lost him. "Ghost Rider, talk to me," I urged after one such silence. "Tell me about yourself. What's your real name?" Static crackled then. John Burroughs." The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name. "John Burroughs," I repeated slowly. "From Tacoma?" "Yeah," the voice replied, surprise evident even through the distortion. "How did you know?" My mouth went dry. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. "John Burroughs went missing 10 years ago," I said. "His truck was found wrecked at the bottom of a ravine off Route 87. They never found his body." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. That's not right," Ghost Rider John finally said. "I'm here. I'm alive. I'm just trapped, that's all. You have to help me." My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But who would do this? And why? "Who is this really?" I demanded. "This isn't funny, man. It's me, I swear." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Please, you have to believe me. I don't understand what's happening." I was about to respond when movement caught my eye. A figure standing on the side of the road ahead. I slowed, squinting through the darkness. It was a man, his arm outstretched, thumb up in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. As I drew closer, the man's features came into focus. My blood ran cold. I knew that face. It had been plastered all over trucking magazines and missing persons bulletins a decade ago. John Burroughs. He looked exactly as he did in those old photos, down to the faded denim jacket and the small scar above his left eyebrow. But that was impossible. If he was alive, he'd be in his 60s now. I blinked and he was gone. Just empty road where he had stood. The CB crackled. "Did you see me?" John's voice asked. "I was there, wasn't I? Why didn't you stop?" My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was hallucinating. I had to be. Too many hours on the road, not enough sleep. That was it. "You're not real," I said, my voice hoarse. "You can't be." "I'm real," he shouted, the radio squealing with feedback. "I'm here, damn it. Why won't you help me?" I switched off the CB with trembling fingers, plunging the cab into silence. I needed to think, to make sense of what was happening. John Burroughs' disappearance was legendary among truckers. He'd vanished without a trace during a brutal winter storm. Search parties combed the area for weeks but found nothing except his wrecked rig. Theories abounded. He'd been hijacked, he'd faked his own death, he'd stumbled into some government conspiracy. But as the years passed, the mystery faded into trucking folklore. And now, somehow, he was talking to me, or something pretending to be him was. I glanced at my GPS. According to it, I was still on my planned route, hundreds of miles from where John had disappeared. But the landscape outside my window had changed. The flat farmland I'd been driving through had given way to dense forest. Moonlight glinted off what looked like a river snaking alongside the road. None of this should be here. A sign loomed out of the darkness, Route 87, bridge ahead. My throat constricted. This wasn't possible. I'd somehow driven hundreds of miles off course without realizing it. Or I wasn't on any real road at all. The CB switched itself back on, John's voice filling the cab. "You're close now. So close. Please, just a little further." Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around, I kept driving. The trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping against the sides of my rig. The road narrowed, winding treacherously. And then I saw it, an old stone bridge spanning a deep ravine, just as John had described. At its center, barely visible in the gloom, was the crumpled wreckage of a truck. I slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding to a halt at the bridge's edge. This was madness. I needed to wake up, to snap out of whatever this was. "You're here," John's voice said softly through the radio. "You found me." I peered through the windshield at the wreck. There was movement inside the crushed cab. A face pressed against the cracked glass, eyes locking with mine. John's face pale and drawn with pain. "Help me," he mouthed. My hand was on the door handle before I realized what I was doing. Some part of me knew that if I stepped out of my truck, I'd be stepping into something I might never return from. But I'm a trucker. When one of us is in trouble, we help, no questions asked. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, far more intense than it should be for this time of year. Wind howled through the ravine, carrying with it the faint sound of voices, cries for help, I realized with a start. Not just one voice, many. As I stumbled towards the wrecked truck, the world seemed to shift around me. Other vehicles materialized out of the gloom, cars, trucks, even a tour bus, all in various states of decay. And in each one, faces watched me, lost souls trapped in an endless loop of their final moments. I understood then. This bridge, this stretch of road, it was a way station between worlds. A place where those who died in transit lingered, unable to move on, reaching out to the living in desperate hope of rescue. John's voice came again, not from the CB this time, but carried on the wind. "Thank you for coming, for hearing me." I reached the driver's side door of his truck. The metal was ice cold under my fingers as I pulled it open. The cab was empty. "I'm sorry," John's voice whispered, fading away. "I just didn't want to be alone anymore." The world spun around me. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my own truck, parked on the shoulder of a busy highway. Normal traffic flowed past. My GPS showed I was right where I should be, on my original route. But the CB radio was dead, every channel nothing but static. As I pulled back onto the road, hands shaking on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd glimpsed something I was never meant to see. A world running parallel to our own, just out of sight. And I knew that from now on, every time I picked up my radio handset, I'd be wondering, who's really on the other end of the line? Story 10. The ping of the ride request cut through the silence of my car like a knife. I glanced at the clock. 1:47 a.m. The blue glow of my phone illuminated the dark interior, showing a pickup just a few blocks away. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the accept button. Something about late-night rides always set me on edge, but rent was due next week, and I needed every fare I could get. With a resigned sigh, I tapped the screen. Little did I know this decision would plunge me into a night of terror I'd never forget. My name's Alex, and I've been driving for Uber for about a year now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, or at least it usually does. Lately, things have been tight, which is why I found myself out driving in the dead of night, picking up fares most drivers would avoid. I pulled up to the address, a rundown bar on the edge of town. The neon open sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. A lone figure stood under the awning, hunched against the light drizzle that had started to fall. As I stopped the car, the figure straightened up and walked towards me. It was a man, probably in his mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He opened the front passenger door and slid in before I could say anything. Hi," I said, caught off guard. Most passengers preferred the back seat, especially this late at night. "I'm Alex. You're John, right?" The man nodded, not looking at me. "That's right." His voice was low and gravelly, with an edge that made me uneasy. I pushed the feeling aside and forced a smile. Where to? He rattled off an address across town. I punched it into the GPS and pulled away from the curb, the wipers squeaking across the windshield as the rain started to pick up. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I kept glancing at my passenger out of the corner of my eye. He sat rigidly in his seat, one hand resting in his lap, the other in the pocket of his jacket. Every few seconds, he'd turn his head slightly, looking out the back window. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He grunted in response, not bothering to look at me. "Fine." The silence stretched on, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof and the occasional directions from my GPS. We were heading into a part of town I wasn't too familiar with, full of abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots. As we stopped at a red light, I noticed John's hand move in his jacket pocket. The movement was subtle, but it made my heart rate spike. Was he reaching for a weapon? My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Just then, my phone chimed with a news alert. I glanced down at the screen and felt my blood run cold. The headline read, "Breaking. Serial killer targeting rideshare drivers still at large." I must have made a sound because John's head snapped towards me. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice unnervingly calm. I nodded, trying to keep my hands from shaking on the steering wheel. "Yeah, just a text from my girlfriend," I lied. He seemed to accept this, turning back to the window, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move in the reflection. The light turned green and I pulled forward, my mind whirling. What were the chances? Surely this couldn't be. But then why was he acting so strangely? Why did he keep reaching into his pocket? We were deep in the warehouse district now, the streets dark and empty. My GPS chirped, instructing me to turn right at the next intersection. That's when John spoke, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Turn here," he said. "I know a shortcut." My heart nearly stopped. This was it. This was how it happened. I'd read the stories, seen the news reports, a strange passenger, an unfamiliar route, a shortcut that led to a dead end and a dead driver. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake pedal. If I refused, would he attack me right here? But if I turned, I'd be driving us further from any possible help. In that moment of indecision, I caught a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. John's hand was emerging from his jacket pocket, and I saw the glint of metal. Time seemed to slow down. I had a split second to react, to make a decision that could mean life or death. In that frozen moment, I saw two paths stretching out before me. Turn down the dark alley as instructed or make a break for it. I chose to run. My foot slammed down on the accelerator, the engine roaring as we shot forward. John cursed, thrown back against his seat. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "I said turn." I ignored him, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I pushed my old Honda to its limits. The speedometer crept past 60, then 70. The rain was coming down harder now, the wipers struggling to keep up. John was fumbling with something, his movements frantic. I caught another glimpse of metal and my worst fears were confirmed. He had a gun. "Pull over," he yelled, his voice tight with rage. "Pull over now or I swear to God I'll shoot you." My mind raced. The warehouse district was a maze and I had no idea where I was going. I needed to find a main road, somewhere with people, with witnesses. But every turn looked the same, dark buildings, empty streets. I took a hard right, the tires screeching on the wet pavement. John was thrown against the door and I heard a metallic clatter. The gun had fallen to the floor. For a moment, we both froze. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, we both dove for it. I kept one hand on the wheel, my eyes darting between the road and the gun on the floor. John unbuckled his seatbelt, lunging forward. His fingers brushed the handle just as I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, fishtailing on the slick road. John was thrown forward, his head slamming into the dashboard with a sickening thud. The gun slid under my seat. We came to a stop in the middle of the street, the engine idling. John wasn't moving. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him. Then he groaned, slowly pushing himself up. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I unbuckled my seatbelt and threw open the door, stumbling out into the rain. My feet slipped on the wet pavement as I ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get away. I could hear shouting behind me. John had recovered and was in pursuit. I ducked down an alley, my shoes splashing through puddles. The rain was so heavy now that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I emerged onto another street identical to the one I'd left. Blank warehouse walls stretched in both directions. I picked a direction at random and ran. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder. John was gaining on me. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw his silhouette, a dark shape in the rain. "You can't run forever," he shouted, his voice echoing off the buildings. He was right. I was already gasping for breath, a stitch forming in my side. I needed to find help, and fast. Up ahead, I saw a faint glow, a streetlight. As I got closer, I realized it was illuminating a phone booth, a relic from another time, but right now it looked like salvation. I reached the booth and yanked open the door, nearly falling inside. My trembling fingers fumbled with the phone, desperately punching in 911. 911, what's your emergency? "Please," I gasped. "Please help me. There's a man chasing me. He had a gun. I think he's the serial killer. Please, I don't know where I am." "Sir, try to remain calm. Can you see any street signs? Any landmarks?" I peered out through the rain-streaked glass of the phone booth. I don't know. It's all warehouses. I was driving an Uber. My passenger, he tried to make me turn down an alley. I ran. Please, you have to help me. "We're tracking your location now, sir. I need you to stay on the line with me. Is there anywhere you can hide?" But before I could answer, I saw a shape moving through the rain, heading straight for the phone booth. John had found me. "He's here," I whispered into the phone. "Oh God, he's here." The door to the phone booth was yanked open. I dropped the phone, pressing myself against the back of the booth. John stood there, rain dripping from his hat, his eyes wild. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice eerily calm. I closed my eyes, waiting for the gunshot, but it never came. Instead, I heard a new sound, sirens growing louder by the second. John's head whipped around, looking for the source of the sound. In that moment of distraction, I acted. I launched myself forward, tackling him to the ground. We grappled in the rain, rolling across the pavement. I managed to pin him down, using all my weight to keep him there. In the distance, I could see flashing lights approaching. "It's over," I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline and relief. "It's over." The police arrived moments later, their cars screeching to a halt around us. John was handcuffed and put in the back of a cruiser. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time. The look in his eyes would haunt me for years to come. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, watching as the scene unfolded. Detectives were examining my car, bagging the gun as evidence. One of them approached me, notepad in hand. "You're a lucky man," he said. "We've been after this guy for months. You might have just saved a lot of lives." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I was just trying to save my own," I said quietly. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I'd come face to face with a serial killer and lived to tell the tale. But I knew that this night would stay with me forever, a stark reminder of how quickly an ordinary drive could turn into a nightmare. I'd survived, yes, but a part of me would always be in that car, heart pounding, watching a stranger's hand disappear into a pocket, hearing those chilling words, "Turn here, I know a shortcut." Story 11. The moment I slid into the back seat of the Uber, I knew something was off. The air inside the car was thick with tension, and the other passenger's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, wild and desperate. I should have trusted my gut and gotten out right then, but I didn't. And that decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was supposed to be a typical Friday night. I'd had a few drinks with colleagues after work and decided to take an Uber pool home to save a few bucks. The app showed another passenger already in the car, which was fine by me. I'd shared plenty of rides before without incident. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, greeted me warmly as I got in. "Evening," he said, glancing back at me. "How's your night going?" "Not bad," I replied, buckling my seatbelt. "Ready to get home and relax." That's when I noticed the other passenger. He was a young man, probably in his mid-20s, with disheveled dark hair and a day's worth of stubble on his chin. He was hunched forward, his knee bouncing nervously. When he looked at me, his eyes were wide and darting, never settling on one spot for long. "Hi," I said, trying to be friendly despite my growing unease. He nodded quickly but didn't speak. His fingers drummed an erratic rhythm on his thigh. The driver pulled away from the curb and we settled into an uncomfortable silence. I pulled out my phone, pretending to be absorbed in something important while stealing glances at the other passenger. He was muttering something under his breath, too quiet for me to make out the words. Every few seconds he'd look over his shoulder as if expecting to see something or someone following us. After a few minutes, the driver cleared his throat. "So, where to next?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. I opened my mouth to give my address, but the other passenger spoke first. "Just keep driving," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't stop." The driver's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" I said, "Don't stop." The man repeated, louder this time. "They're after me. We can't let them catch us." My heart began to race. This couldn't be happening. I was trapped in a car with a paranoid stranger, possibly high on something, who thought he was being chased. "Sir," the driver said calmly, "I need to know where I'm taking you. I can't just drive around aimlessly." The man leaned forward, gripping the back of the driver's seat. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if they find me. We have to keep moving." I caught the driver's eye in the mirror. He looked as alarmed as I felt. "Look," he said, I'm going to pull over and we can sort this out." "No!" the man shouted, making me jump. "Don't you dare stop this car." My fingers hovered over my phone, ready to call 911. But before I could, the man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. A gun. "Keep driving," he said, his voice eerily calm now as he pointed the weapon at the driver's head. "Or I start shooting." Time seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The driver's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he kept the car moving. Okay, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Just stay calm. We'll keep driving." The man with the gun turned to look at me, his eyes wild. "You," he said, gesturing with the weapon. "Give me your phone now." With trembling hands, I handed over my phone. He snatched it and immediately smashed it against the door handle, shattering the screen. "No calls for help," he muttered, tossing the broken device onto the floor. I nodded, too terrified to speak. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. Could I open the door and jump out? We were on the highway now, moving too fast for that to be anything but suicidal. "Where are we going?" the driver asked, his voice strained but admirably steady. The man with the gun leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted. "Just away. Somewhere they can't find me." "Who's after you?" I asked, immediately regretting the question as his wild eyes turned to me. He stared at me for a long moment as if deciding whether to answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The government. They've been watching me for years. Experiments, mind control. You wouldn't believe the things I've seen." Great, I thought. Not just paranoid, but full-on conspiracy theory paranoid. "I'm sure we can help you," the driver said, his tone soothing. "Maybe we can take you to the police station. They can protect you." "No!" the man shouted, brandishing the gun again. "The police are in on it. They're all in on it. You can't trust anyone." We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, the cityscape giving way to suburbs, then to open countryside. The man with the gun alternated between manic rambling about government conspiracies and long stretches of twitchy silence. I tried to catch the driver's eye in the mirror, hoping to silently communicate some kind of plan. But every time I thought I had his attention, the man with the gun would shift or mutter something, and the moment would pass. As we entered a more rural area, the driver spoke up again. "Look, I'm running low on gas. We're going to have to stop soon." The man with the gun leaned forward, peering at the fuel gauge. "You're lying," he hissed. "We've got at least a quarter tank left." "Maybe so," the driver replied, his voice admirably calm. "But I don't know where we're going or how far it is. We should fill up while we can." For a tense moment, I thought the man might argue or worse, but then he slumped back in his seat. "Fine," he muttered, "but make it quick, and no funny business." A few miles later, we pulled into a small gas station. The forecourt was deserted, lit only by harsh fluorescent lights. As the driver got out to pump the gas, the man with the gun turned to me. "You," he said, gesturing with the weapon. "Go inside and pay. And remember, I'll be watching. Try anything and your driver friend gets a bullet in the head." I nodded, my mouth dry. As I got out of the car on shaky legs, the cool night air hit me like a slap. It was the first time I'd been out of that claustrophobic backseat in hours, and for a moment I considered making a run for it. But one glance back at the car, seeing the gun still trained on the oblivious driver, killed that idea. I couldn't leave him to face this alone. Inside the gas station, a bored-looking clerk glanced up from his phone. I tried to signal with my eyes that something was wrong, but he just stared at me blankly. "Pump 3, I said, my voice hoarse. "And, can I use your phone? Mine's dead." The clerk shrugged and pushed an ancient cordless phone across the counter. My hand shook as I picked it up, half expecting the man with the gun to burst in at any moment. I dialed 911, turning away from the window and speaking as quietly as I could. "Please help," I whispered as soon as the operator answered. "We're being held at gunpoint. Gas station on Highway 16 about an hour outside the city. Black sedan, Uber driver, and 2 passengers. The man has a gun. Please hurry." I hung up before the operator could ask any more questions. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the man with the gun would hear it even from the car. Forcing myself to appear calm, I paid for the gas and walked back outside. The man was watching me intently as I approached the car. I gave what I hoped was a casual nod, praying he hadn't noticed anything amiss. As I slid back into the back seat, the man turned to me, his eyes narrowed. "What took so long?" "Sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clerk was having trouble with the register. He stared at me for a long moment, and I was sure he could see right through my lie, but then he just grunted and turned back to the driver. "Let's go. Now." As we pulled back onto the highway, I silently prayed that help would arrive soon. The weight of what I'd done, potentially endangering all our lives by making that call, pressed down on me. But I knew it had been our only chance. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The man with the gun grew increasingly agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder and muttering about being followed. And then, finally, I saw them. Flashing lights in the distance behind us, growing closer by the second. The man saw them too. "No!" he screamed, waving the gun wildly. "They found us." "How did they find us?" The driver, to his credit, remained remarkably calm. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to pull over now. Please, let's not make this any worse than it has to be." For a terrifying moment, I thought the man might actually shoot, but as the police cars surrounded us, sirens blaring, he seemed to deflate. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. As the police approached the car, weapons drawn, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It was over. We were safe. In the chaotic aftermath, the arrests, the questioning, the statements, one thought kept running through my mind: I'm never taking an Uber pool again. Story 12. The neon sign flickered weakly in the fog, casting an eerie red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. "Rosie's Diner, open 24 hours, it proclaimed, though at 3 a.m. I wondered who besides me was desperate enough for coffee to test that claim. I pulled open the glass door, a tinny bell announcing my arrival. The smell hit me first. Grease, coffee, and something else, something off that I couldn't quite place. My eyes adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting, taking in the scene before me. I'm Amy, 29, a night shift nurse at the local hospital. After a particularly grueling 12-hour stretch in the ER, I was running on fumes and in desperate need of caffeine before my drive home. Rosie's was the only place open, a last resort pit stop for insomniacs, truckers, and other nocturnal creatures like myself. The diner was nearly deserted. An elderly man hunched over a newspaper at the far end of the counter, a half-eaten slice of pie forgotten beside him. In a booth near the back, a couple sat across from each other, their bodies tense, voices low but heated. Neither looked up as I entered. Behind the counter, a waitress wiped down the already gleaming surface with mechanical precision. Her movements were robotic, her gaze unfocused. The name tag pinned to her uniform identified her as Dottie. "Sit anywhere you like, hon," she called out, her voice flat and disinterested. I slid onto a stool at the counter, as far from the other patrons as I could manage. Up close, I could see that Dottie's eyes were bloodshot, dark circles testament to too many late nights. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, wisps escaping to frame a face that might have been pretty once before time and hard living took their toll. "Coffee? Black?" I said. And maybe a menu? Dottie nodded, turning to the ancient coffee maker behind her. As she poured, I noticed her hands trembling slightly. She set the mug in front of me with a dull thunk sloshing a bit over the side. Sorry about that, she mumbled, reaching for a rag. As she leaned across the counter to wipe up the spill, I caught a whiff of something sharp and medicinal underlying her cheap perfume. My nurse's instincts kicked in. Alcohol, maybe pills. No worries, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Rough night? Dottie's eyes flicked to mine, a flash of something crossing her face before the mask of indifference slipped back into place. You could say that, she replied. Menu's under your elbow. I glanced down, noticing the laminated menu for the first time. As I reached for it, movement in my peripheral vision made me turn. The couple in the booth had stood up, the man gripping the woman's arm tightly as he steered her towards the door. Her face was pale, eyes wide with what looked like fear. Everything okay over there? I called out, half rising from my stool. The man's head snapped towards me, his expression dark. Mind your own business, he snarled. The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but a sharp tug on her arm silenced her. They disappeared into the fog, the bell jingling cheerfully in their wake. An uncomfortable silence settled over the diner. I turned back to Dottie, but she was suddenly very interested in restocking the napkin dispensers. Shouldn't we, call someone? I asked hesitantly. Dottie shrugged, not meeting my gaze. Ain't our place to get involved in folks' private matters. Something about her tone made my skin crawl. I took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter, burnt taste. As I set the mug down, I noticed a dark smudge on its rim. I rubbed at it with my thumb, but it didn't come off. A cough from the end of the counter drew my attention. The old man with the newspaper was watching me, his rheumy eyes intent. Slowly, deliberately, he shook his head. My heart began to race. Something was very, very wrong here. I pushed the mug away, suddenly no longer thirsty. You know what? I think I'll skip the food. How much for the coffee? $1.50, Dottie said, already turning away. I fumbled in my pocket for some cash, my fingers brushing against my phone. An idea struck me. Hey, do you have a restroom I could use before I go? Dottie pointed towards a door marked restrooms, without looking up. I slid off the stool, willing my legs not to shake as I made my way across the grimy linoleum. The bathroom was tiny and reeked of cheap disinfectant. I locked the door behind me, then pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I leaned against the sink, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I was being paranoid, right? Too many night shifts, too much bad coffee, and overactive imagination fueled by one too many true crime podcasts. There had to be a reasonable explanation for the weirdness out there. A muffled thump from somewhere beyond the bathroom made me jump. It was followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed my ear to the door. Dottie's voice drifted through, clearer now. Third one this week. Boss ain't gonna be happy. A man's voice responded, low and gruff. Can't be helped. Bitch was gonna cause trouble. You see the way she was looking at that nurse? My blood ran cold. They were talking about the couple who'd left. Speaking of, the man continued, we got another problem. That nurse, she's asking questions. Leave her to me, Dottie replied. I slipped a little something in her coffee. She'll be out cold in a few minutes. Then we can... I didn't wait to hear the rest. Panic surging through me, I looked around wildly for an escape route. The bathroom window was tiny, barely big enough for a child to squeeze through. I was trapped. My gaze fell on my phone again. Still no signal, but I opened the camera app, switching it to video mode. If I couldn't get out of here, I could at least leave some evidence of what was happening. With shaking hands, I pressed record and began to speak in a hushed whisper. My name is Amy Callahan. I'm at Rosie's Diner off Highway 16. Something bad is happening here. If anyone finds this... A wave of dizziness washed over me, making the room spin. The coffee, oh God, the coffee. I gripped the edge of the sink, fighting to stay conscious. They're killing people, I continued, my words slurring slightly. The waitress, Dottie, she drugged me. There's a man, they were talking about bodies. The door rattled, someone trying the handle. Everything all right in there, hon? Dottie called out, her voice sickly sweet. You've been a while, feeling okay? Fine. I managed to croak out. Be right out. I turned back to my phone, vision blurring. If anyone sees this, please, help. The edges of my vision were going dark. I slumped to the floor, my back against the door. As my eyes fluttered closed, I heard the sound of a key in the lock. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. A concerned face swam into focus above me, young, male, wearing a police uniform. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you all right?" I blinked, disoriented. I was lying on a gurney in what looked like the back of an ambulance. Red and blue lights flashed outside the open doors. What happened?" I croaked, my mouth dry as sandpaper. The officer's expression was grim. "You were found unconscious in the bathroom of Rosie's diner. Do you remember anything?" It came back in a rush, the weird vibe, the couple, the overheard conversation, the video. "My phone," I said urgently, trying to sit up. "There's a video." The officer gently pushed me back down. "Easy there. We found your phone. The video. It's what led us here." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by confusion. "But how? There was no signal." "Your phone automatically uploaded it to the cloud once you got back in range," he explained. "Your emergency contact saw it and called us immediately." I closed my eyes, sending a silent thank you to my perpetually worried mother who had insisted on being my ice contact. "What about the diner?" I asked. "Dottie, the other customers." The officer's face darkened. "Gone. Place was empty when we got here, but we found evidence in the basement. It looks like this has been going on for a while." A chill ran down my spine. "The couple I saw, that man." "We're looking for them," he assured me. "Your video gave us some solid leads. You did good, Ms. Callahan. You might have saved lives tonight." As the ambulance doors closed and we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Rosie's through the window. In the harsh light of day, it looked shabby and abandoned, nothing like the sinister place of my memories. I leaned back on the gurney, exhaustion finally overtaking me. But as I drifted off, one thought kept circling in my mind. How many other Rosies were out there, tucked away on lonely highways? How many Dotties wearing cheerful name tags and serving up something far darker than burnt coffee? And how many travelers, desperate for a late-night pit stop, might never make it home? Story 13. The stench of rotting garbage filled my nostrils as I hefted another bag into the truck. It was a smell I'd grown used to over the years, but this morning something was different. There was an undercurrent to the usual odors, something metallic and sickly sweet. As I reached for the next bag, my hand brushed against something hard and cold. Curious, I dug through the trash and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of messages that made my blood run cold. Little did I know this discovery would plunge me into a nightmare I never could have imagined. "My name's Tom, and I've been a garbage collector in this city for the better part of a decade. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps me in shape. Plus, you'd be amazed at the things people throw away. I found everything from barely used electronics to antique furniture, but never anything like this. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I'd been on my route since 5 a.m., making my way through the quiet suburban streets as the world slowly woke up around me. The rhythmic hum of the garbage truck and the occasional clang of metal were the only sounds breaking the pre-dawn silence. I was about halfway through my route when I turned onto Maple Street. Nice neighborhood, mostly older folks who kept to themselves. As I worked my way down the street, I noticed something odd about the trash outside number 37. Among the usual array of garbage bags and recycling bins was a small pile of electronics. Old phones, a laptop, and what looked like a tablet, all smashed to pieces. Now, this isn't necessarily unusual. People upgrade their devices all the time. But something about this pile made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way the devices seemed to have been deliberately destroyed, or how they were carefully arranged at the top of the pile, almost like they were meant to be noticed. I approached cautiously, my heavy work boots crunching on the gravel driveway. That's when I noticed the smell, that metallic, sickly sweet odor that seemed out of place among the usual garbage stench. As I began loading the bags into the truck, my hand brushed against something solid in one of them. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully opened the bag. Inside, nestled among coffee grounds and food scraps, was a pristine black smartphone. It looked brand new, without a scratch on it. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then pocketed the phone. I'd take a closer look once I finished the street. As I continued my route, my mind kept wandering back to the phone. Why would someone throw away a perfectly good device along with a bunch of smashed ones? It didn't make sense. Finally, I finished the street and had a moment to myself. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and pressed the power button. To my surprise, it turned on immediately. The screen lit up, revealing a background image of a smiling couple, a man and woman, probably in their early 30s. I swiped up, expecting to be met with a lock screen. Instead, the phone unlocked instantly, opening to a series of text messages. My eyes widened as I read the first few lines. "It's done. The body's been taken care of. Are you sure no one saw you?" "Positive. Used the method we discussed. No traces left behind." My heart started racing. Was this some kind of joke? A prank by some kids with too much time on their hands? But as I scrolled through more messages, a sinking feeling in my gut told me this was very, very real. There were photos, too. Images that made my stomach churn. Crime scenes, I realized, but not from news reports or TV shows. These looked raw, unfiltered, real. I was so engrossed in what I was seeing that I didn't notice the car pulling up beside the truck. It wasn't until I heard a tap on the window that I looked up, nearly dropping the phone in surprise. A man stood there, smiling politely. He looked eerily familiar, and with a jolt, I realized why. He was the man from the phone's background image. "Excuse me," he said, his voice friendly but with an undercurrent of tension. "I think you might have something of mine." I froze, my mind racing. Did he know I'd seen the messages, the photos? I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "My phone. I accidentally threw it away this morning, black smartphone. I don't suppose you've come across it." I hesitated, weighing my options. If I handed over the phone, I'd be destroying evidence of what looked like multiple crimes. But if I didn't, how would this man react? He seemed calm now, but there was something in his eyes that made me deeply uneasy. "I haven't seen anything like that," I lied, hoping my face didn't betray me yet. "But I'll keep an eye out. If I find it, I'll make sure it gets returned." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "That's very kind of you. I'd really appreciate it if you could take another look. It's very important that I get that phone back. There are some personal photos on it that I'd rather not lose." The way he said personal photos sent a chill down my spine. I knew he wasn't talking about family vacation snapshots. "I'll do my best, sir," I said, my hand unconsciously moving to my pocket where the phone sat like a lead weight. "But I've got to get moving now. Tight schedule to keep." He stepped back from the truck, that unsettling smile still fixed on his face. "Of course, I understand. Thank you for your time." I watched in the rearview mirror as he walked back to his car, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as he was out of sight, I pulled the phone out again, my fingers shaking as I navigated to the Photos app. What I saw made my blood run cold. The personal photos weren't just crime scenes. They were trophies, images of victims, some clearly alive and terrified, others not. And in some of the photos, I could see the man who had just been talking to me, smiling at the camera like he was posing for a vacation snapshot instead of standing over a brutalized body. I felt sick. I needed to get this to the police, but how? If I called now, the man might see me. He might still be watching. And if he was capable of the things I'd seen in those photos, I had no doubt he'd do whatever it took to get that phone back. With trembling hands, I turned the phone off and shoved it deep into my pocket. I'd finish my route, then head straight to the police station. It was the only way. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every car that drove by made me flinch. Every person I saw on the street could be him, coming back for the phone. For me. Finally, mercifully, I finished my route. I just pulled into the depot and was about to head to my car when my own phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out, expecting it to be from my supervisor or maybe my girlfriend. Instead, I saw an unknown number. The message made my heart stop. "I see you. Put it back." I looked up, scanning the parking lot frantically. There, across the street, was a familiar car, and inside, watching me with that same unsettling smile, was the man from Maple Street. My mind raced. How had he found me? How did he get my number? Then it hit me. He must have called his own phone while I had it turned on. He'd been tracking me this whole time. I had two choices. I could give him back the phone and pretend this never happened, or I could make a run for it and try to get to the police. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. As I stood there, frozen with indecision, another text came through. You have 1 minute to bring me my property, or things will get very unpleasant for you. I looked back at the car. The man was no longer smiling. Instead, his expression was cold, calculating. I had no doubt he meant every word of his threat. With shaking hands, I pulled the black phone from my pocket. I should run, I thought. I should get in my car and drive straight to the police station. But fear kept me rooted to the spot. Fear of what this man might do, not just to me, but to my family, my friends. I took a step towards his car, then another. Each step felt like I was walking to my own execution. As I approached, he rolled down the window. Wise choice, he said, holding out his hand. The phone, please. I hesitated for just a moment, then placed the device in his outstretched palm. As soon as it left my hand, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a surge of shame. I was letting him get away with it. All those victims, all that evidence, gone. He pocketed the phone, then fixed me with a steely gaze. I trust this will be the end of our interaction. For your sake, I hope you haven't done anything foolish with my property. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. Good, he said, starting the car. Have a nice day. As he drove away, I stood there in the parking lot feeling like the world's biggest coward. I'd had evidence of horrific crimes in my hand, and I'd given it back to the perpetrator out of fear. It wasn't until later, sitting in my apartment with the doors locked and curtains drawn, that I realized something. In my panic, I'd forgotten about my own phone. The phone that now had a text message from an unknown number, a number that belonged to a serial killer. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. Maybe it wasn't too late to do the right thing after all. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, a black smartphone was buzzing with a new message. I see you. Put it back. And I knew that this nightmare was far from over. Story 14. The car door clicked shut behind me, and in that instant, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, cold and calculating, nothing like the friendly face in the profile picture on my rideshare app. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't my ride at all. But by then, it was too late. It had been a long day at the office, and I was eager to get home. As I stepped out of the building, I reflexively opened my rideshare app and requested a ride. The app showed a blue sedan would arrive in 3 minutes. Right on cue, a blue car pulled up, and I climbed in without a second thought. Evening, the driver said, his voice gruff and low. Where to? I opened my mouth to give my address, but paused. Shouldn't he already know my destination? I glanced at my phone, ready to confirm the details, only to find the screen black. Dead battery. Perfect timing. 1542 Maple Street, please, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease in my gut. The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. As we merged into traffic, I noticed he hadn't started the trip on his own phone. In fact, I couldn't see a phone mounted anywhere on the dashboard. Excuse me, I said, leaning forward slightly. Did you start the trip on your end? I just want to make sure everything's squared away. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. No need to worry about that, he said. We'll get you where you need to go. A chill ran down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. I reached for the door handle, intending to jump out at the next red light, but as I tugged on it, nothing happened. The child safety locks were engaged. Panic surged through me. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I think there's been a mistake, I said, forcing a laugh. This isn't my rideshare, is it? The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror again. This time there was no mistaking the menace in his gaze. No, he said simply. It's not... My heart began to race. I looked around frantically, searching for something, anything that could help me. But the car was clean, almost sterile. No personal effects, no clutter, nothing I could use as a weapon. Look, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound confident. I don't know what you want, but this is a mistake. I'm nobody important. I don't have any money. Just let me out and we can forget this ever happened. He chuckled, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Oh, it's not about money," he said. "And you might not think you're important, but you'd be surprised." We were heading out of the city now, the familiar buildings giving way to industrial areas and then open countryside. With each passing mile, my chances of escape seemed to dwindle. I closed my eyes, trying to think. What would the heroes in movies do in this situation? Break a window, attack the driver? Both seemed likely to end in disaster at the speed we were going. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. The driver remained silent for a long moment. Just as I thought he wasn't going to answer, he spoke. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere you can't be found." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Who was this man? Why had he targeted me? What did he mean by somewhere I can't be found? But the overwhelming fear kept me silent. As we drove deeper into the countryside, I tried to memorize every turn, every landmark. If I managed to escape, I'd need to know which way to run. But the sameness of the rural landscape soon had me disoriented. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, we turned onto a narrow dirt road. The car bounced and jolted as we made our way down the rutted path. In the distance, I could make out a dilapidated farmhouse, dark and foreboding against the twilight sky. My captor pulled up in front of the house and cut the engine. For a moment, we sat in silence, the sudden quiet oppressive after the constant hum of the road. "We're here," he said, turning to face me for the first time. In the fading light, his features were hard and angular, his eyes dark pools that seemed to swallow what little illumination remained. "Please," I whispered, a last desperate plea. "You don't have to do this. Whatever it is, we can figure something out." He shook his head almost sadly. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't about what I want. It's about keeping you safe." Before I could process his words, he was out of the car and opening my door. I considered making a run for it, but where would I go? We were miles from anywhere, and the encroaching darkness would make navigation impossible. With no other choice, I let him lead me into the house. The interior was surprisingly clean and well-maintained, a stark contrast to its exterior. He guided me to a room at the back of the house, flicking on a light to reveal what looked like a small apartment. A bed, a desk, a kitchenette, and a door that presumably led to a bathroom. "This is where you'll be staying," he said. "There's food in the fridge, books on the shelf. The window's barred and the door locks from the outside, so don't get any ideas about escaping." I stared at him, disbelief warring with terror. "You can't just keep me here," I said. "People will look for me. The police. The police can't help you." He cut me off. "Not with what's coming." "What's coming?" I asked, my curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. "What are you talking about?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. For a moment he looked tired, almost vulnerable. "I know this doesn't make sense to you," he said. "But trust me, this is for your own good. You're special, whether you know it or not. And there are people out there who would do anything to get their hands on you." I shook my head, trying to make sense of his words. "You're crazy," I said. "I'm not special. I'm just a regular person with a regular job. You've got the wrong person." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what they all say at first," he replied. "But you'll understand soon enough. For now, try to get some rest. I'll be back in the morning to explain everything." With that, he stepped out of the room. I heard the lock click into place, sealing me in. For a long moment, I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then, like a dam bursting, the reality of my situation hit me. I was trapped, kidnapped by a madman who seemed to believe he was protecting me from some unnamed threat. I ran to the window, but as he'd said, it was securely barred. The door was solid wood, the lock apparently on the outside. I was well and truly trapped. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. What did he mean I was special? Who were these people he claimed were after me? And most importantly, how was I going to get out of this? As the adrenaline of the past few hours began to wear off, fatigue set in. Despite my best efforts to stay awake and alert, I found my eyes growing heavy. The last thing I remember before drifting off was the distant sound of a car engine starting up, then fading into the night. I awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back and I felt a fresh wave of panic. Sunlight streamed through the barred window, illuminating the small room. In the harsh light of day, my prison seemed even more surreal. It was clean and comfortable, more like a studio apartment than a cell. But a prison is a prison, no matter how nicely it's decorated. I got up and began to explore, hoping to find something, anything that could help me escape. But the room was frustratingly secure. The window bars were solid, the door unyielding. Even the kitchenette knives were cheap plastic, useless as weapons. As I was examining the lock on the door for what felt like the 100th time, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart began to race as the lock turned and the door swung open. My captor stood there holding a tray of food. He looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more ordinary. If I'd passed him on the street, I wouldn't have given him a second glance. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray down on the desk. "I hope you slept well." I stared at him, incredulous. "Slept well? Are you kidding me? You kidnapped me." He winced slightly at my words. "I know this is difficult to understand," he said, "but I promise I'm here to help you." "Help me," I repeated. "By locking me up? How is this helping?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration or uncertainty. "It's complicated," he said, "but I need you to trust me. You're in danger, whether you realize it or not." I shook my head, anger replacing fear. "Trust you? You abducted me. I don't even know your name." "Tom," he said quietly. "My name is Tom, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to try. Because what's coming, it's bigger than both of us." I sat down on the bed, suddenly feeling very tired. "What's coming, Tom? What could possibly justify this?" He paused for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "Have you ever felt different?" he finally asked. "Like you could do things others couldn't? See things they couldn't see?" I opened my mouth to deny it, but something stopped me. Because the truth was, I had felt different. There were times when I seemed to know things I shouldn't, when I could sense danger before it happened. But I'd always written it off as coincidence or an overactive imagination. Tom must have seen the hesitation in my eyes because he nodded. "You have, haven't you?" he said. "That's why you're here. That's why they want you." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "People who would use your abilities for their own gain," he replied. "People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get what they want." I shook my head, trying to clear it. This was insane. It had to be. And yet, a small part of me wondered if there might be some truth to his words. "Even if what you're saying is true," I said, "this can't be the solution. You can't keep me locked up forever." Tom nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. "You're right," he said. "I can't. But I can keep you safe long enough to teach you how to protect yourself, to help you understand and control your abilities." I stared at him, torn between disbelief and a growing sense that my life was about to change irrevocably. "And then what, I asked. "And then," he said, "you'll have a choice to make. But for now, eat your breakfast. We have a lot of work to do." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Tom?" He paused at the door, looking back at me. "I'm not saying I believe you," I said, "but I'll listen." He nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "That's all I ask," he said, and closed the door behind him. As I heard the lock click into place, I sat down at the desk and stared at the food before me. My world had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. Nothing made sense anymore. But as I picked up the fork, I realized one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, my life would never be the same again. Story 15. The ancient garbage truck groaned as I shifted gears, the hydraulics hissing in protest. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, but the alleyways remained shrouded in shadows. It was in those shadows that I first noticed the car. I'm Ray, 42, garbage collector for the city's sanitation department. 15 years on the job, and I'd seen it all, or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for that morning. The car was a nondescript sedan, dark blue or maybe black in the dim light. I might not have noticed it at all if it hadn't been for the way it lingered at each corner, engine idling, before creeping forward to the next stop on our route. "Hey, Marco," I called to my partner, who was hefting a bin onto the truck's lift. "You see that car?" Marco paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the early morning chill. He squinted down the street, then shrugged. "Probably just some early bird heading to work." "White." I shook my head, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. "No reason, let's keep moving." We continued our route, the familiar rhythm of stop, lift, dump usually lulling me into an almost meditative state, but today my nerves were on edge. At each new street, I found myself scanning for that car. More often than not, I spotted it, always keeping a careful distance. By our third neighborhood, even Marco had noticed. "Okay, that's weird," he muttered, climbing back into the cab after our latest stop. "You think we should call it in?" I hesitated. What would we even say? That we had a hunch some random car was following us? It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. "Let's give it a bit longer," I decided. "Maybe they'll turn off soon." But they didn't turn off. If anything, the car grew bolder, edging closer with each passing block. I could make out two figures inside now, a driver and a passenger, both men from what I could tell. We were approaching one of the ritzier neighborhoods on our route, all manicured lawns and McMansions set back from the street. As I maneuvered the truck around a particularly tight corner, I glanced in my side mirror. The car was gone. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a new wave of unease. Had I imagined the whole thing? "I don't see them," Marco said, voicing my thoughts. He sounded as unsettled as I felt. We pulled up to our next stop, a sprawling Tudor-style home with an overflowing recycling bin at the end of its long driveway. Marco hopped out, and I watched in the mirror as he made his way towards the bin. That's when I saw it. The car parked half hidden behind a hedge a few houses down. As I watched, the passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from this distance, I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. "Marco," I shouted, fumbling for the door handle. "Get back here now." Marco turned, confusion evident on his face. Then his eyes widened, focusing on something behind me. Before I could react, my door was wrenched open, and I found myself staring down the barrel of a gun. "Don't move," a voice growled. "Both of you, nice and easy, into the back of the truck." My mind raced as I climbed down from the cab, hands raised. This couldn't be happening. Who would want to hijack a garbage truck, of all things? The man from the car, tall, with a scraggly beard and wild eyes, kept his gun trained on us as his partner, a shorter, nervous-looking guy, ushered us towards the back of the truck. Marco shot me a panicked look as we were forced to climb into the cavernous, reeking interior. "What do you want?" I managed to ask as Scraggly Beard slammed the hydraulic door shut, plunging us into near darkness. "Shut up," came the muffled reply. "You'll find out soon enough." I heard the cab door slam, felt the truck lurch into motion. My stomach churned, and not just from the stench of rotting garbage surrounding us. "Ray," Marco whispered, his voice trembling. "What's happening? Why are they doing this?" I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know, but we need to find a way out of here." Easier said than done. The hydraulic door was locked from the outside, and the only other exit was a small hatch in the roof, designed for maintenance access. Even if we could reach it, we'd be sitting ducks if we tried to escape while the truck was moving. I felt my way through the trash, searching for anything we could use as a weapon. My hand closed around something solid, a broken piece of PVC pipe. Not much, but better than nothing. The truck made a series of turns, each one taking us further from our familiar route. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we jerked to a stop. Muffled voices filtered through the walls of the truck, followed by the sound of the hydraulic system engaging. Marco and I pressed ourselves against the far wall as the rear door began to lift. Sunlight flooded in, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw we were in some kind of industrial yard, surrounded by stacks of shipping containers. Scraggly Beard and his nervous partner stood at the truck's opening, guns still aimed at us. "Out!" Scraggly Beard barked. "Nice and slow!" As we climbed down, I gripped the PVC pipe tighter, hidden behind my back. If I could just get close enough. "Over there," Nervous Guy said, gesturing with his gun towards one of the containers. Its doors stood open, revealing a dark interior. That's when I noticed the smell. Beneath the lingering stench of garbage clinging to our clothes, There was something else, something worse. It was coming from the container. "Oh, God," Marco gagged beside me. "Is that—" "Bodies," I whispered, the horrible realization dawning. "They're using our route to dispose of bodies." Scraggly Beard grinned, a manic glint in his eye. "Smart man. Too smart, maybe. Don't worry, you'll have plenty of company in there." As they herded us towards the container, my mind raced. This was it, our last chance. I locked eyes with Marco, trying to convey my plan without words. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. Just as we reached the container's threshold, I spun, swinging the pipe with all my might. It connected with Scraggly Beard's wrist with a satisfying crack. He howled, the gun clattering to the ground. Marco didn't hesitate. He lunged at Nervous Guy, tackling him to the ground. The gun went off, the shot going wide. What followed was chaos. I grappled with Scraggly Beard, both of us scrambling for the fallen gun. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marco and Nervous Guy rolling on the ground, trading blows. My fingers closed around the gun just as Scraggly Beard's boot connected with my ribs. Pain exploded in my side, but I held on, swinging the weapon up and around. "Freeze!" I wheezed, aiming at Scraggly Beard's chest. "It's over!" For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a roar of rage, Scraggly Beard charged at me. I squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the yard. Scraggly Beard stumbled, a look of shock on his face, before collapsing to the ground. "Ray!" Marco called out. He had Nervous Guy pinned, one arm twisted behind his back. "You okay?" I nodded, though every breath sent shards of pain through my side. Call the police," I managed. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the area, forensics teams descended on the shipping container. Marco and I were checked over by paramedics, then separated for questioning. It wasn't until late that evening, as I sat in an uncomfortable chair at the police station, that the full weight of what had happened hit me. We had stumbled upon and helped bring down a major human trafficking operation. The bodies in the container were victims who had died in transit. Our garbage route had been the perfect cover for disposing of the evidence. A detective approached, looking weary but satisfied. "Mr. Gonzalez, we're done with our questions for now. You're free to go home." I stood on shaky legs. What about the men who took us?" The detective's expression hardened. "The one you shot didn't make it. His partner is in custody, singing like a canary. Thanks to you and your partner, we've got enough to bring down their entire network." I should have felt relieved, maybe even proud. Instead, all I felt was numb. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I found Marco waiting for me. Without a word, he pulled me into a crushing hug. "Hell of a day, partner," he said as he released me, his attempt at a smile not quite reaching his eyes. I nodded, unsure what to say. How do you process something like this? How do you go back to normal after seeing the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of everyday life? But as we walked towards Marco's car, I realized something. We had seen that darkness, yes, but we had also faced it, fought it, and in our own small way, we had won. Tomorrow, we would get back in that truck. We would follow our route, collect the city's trash, and we would keep our eyes open. Because sometimes the most ordinary jobs can lead to the most extraordinary acts of heroism.